We are at the management office here in Nashville, Tennessee, and it's very stuffy.
Greta Van Fleet headquarters,
I guess.
in an undisclosed location.
This is a conference room, really.
You have literally just disclosed the location, so it's terrible OPSEC, as they say in the business.
In a disclosed location.
In a recently disclosed location. I do like to prepare for these on occasion. And I was going back and listening to interviews. And one of the things that I appreciate is it seems like you guys are always doing interviews together. Like it's always the two of you.
Yeah, Sam and I, we like to badger people. So I think we're pretty much just warming up. So you might be aware of the monsters that we can be.
Gets pretty ugly.
I don't know, yeah, no, we entertain each other quite a bit. So I think that's probably the reason why we've decided to do it that way.
I was reading some comments on some of the interviews and people were like, I think made the fair point that the two of you complement each other in ways. Yeah. Obviously, you've known each other for a long time. And you go pretty far back, I imagine.
Uh-huh.
There are actually instances where the two of you complete each other's sentences, it sounds like.
Yeah, it's kind of that thing, yeah.
Is there a concern of you guys being a little too close, in terms of thinking too closely along the same lines? I mean, I assume when you've got a band, you want like a diverse dynamic. I
think, what I really like about just sort of having other people around is because of the people that have different ideas than me. And that's kind of, I think, part of it. It's sort of, it keeps things sort of linear, and you kind of just have this experience where you're bouncing ideas around and getting further with a concept, and that's really cool. So I think that's probably the appeal in that. But obviously, no, I mean, everybody's got their own sort of individual perspective, so that's pretty great, and that's definitely fairly evident. But then it's always, I mean, in talking to people, you want to be, I want to be really honest the entire way through and spontaneous. But I think it's like you talk to so many people at some point that you try to catch yourself and you're almost saying the same thing in a different way. But it's like, well, if you're exploring things a bit further, or if there are other ideas, then of course there's entirely different angle to look at it. So I think that's a thing as well. So
staying away from robotic responses. And it's easy to become robots, I guess. I mean, some days, you can go forever and you finally wake up, you're like, oh wait, I'm alive.
I assume that there are days when you're literally answering the same question in different interviews 10 to 15 times.
Yeah.
So we appreciate the different ones like this.
Part of it is that you're able to, and this is probably a good quality in both being an interview subject, but also just being in a band or any sort of creative pursuit with other people, is that you're there to call each other out on your respective bullshit.
Yeah, you need an attitude check every once and again.
That's so true.
And there's nothing.
Sometimes somebody else is doing it. Sometimes you catch yourself.
Yeah, I mean, there's nothing like pure unhinged honesty, and filters are a thing because of that, because of non-brothers and people who haven't spent their entire lives together.
Yeah, there's this weird formality in casual conversation that people talk about the weather or something.
I think maybe you're alluding a little bit to falling into the trap of egoism, and it's one of those things where you want to be proud of the work that you do, and you want to think that you're doing a good job. But when you win a Grammy or when everyone is telling you that you're great, you start to think that you're great. And like who else but family to be around to really kind of let you know how great you really are.
I fear pride quite a bit. It's always,
oh yeah, because you got a lot of it.
You shut up.
This is what I'm talking about.
This is it. I fear that because it's like one of those things that I think could be really toxic if it gets away from you. And, and it's like, am I proud of what I've done? I'm happy that I think ultimately I'm proud that I've created, or that we've created something that we view as beautiful and organic, and put it into the world in rotation, and for people to consume it and take things away from it. And but when it's sort of goes beyond the artistic creation, then it's, I think it could be very destructive or dangerous.
Yeah, you can feel like you're the most important, person in the world when you're on stage. But once you start taking that stuff into the real world,
and it's very
it's
special.
very unhealthy.
And it's like sort of, I wake up some mornings and ask myself, why do I deserve this? Because this is wonderful and I'm very grateful for it. What the success that we've had and that the way people respond to what we do. But what do I do to deserve it? And that's kind of really strange. You stand in front of all of these people and it's, I think, because we're just trying to share a piece of ourselves a little bit. We're trying to do something morally, ethically good, to sort of turn people on and start to inspire ideas and just sort of function of evolution as being a celebration. And so then that's all reciprocated. The audience seems to toss it back at you. So it goes both ways. So it's a strange communication. And that'll never have a conclusion on. I don't know.
It's kind of like a reminder too, that everybody's alive. It's like, okay, so everybody, you're watching this. We're all here together, and that activates something in the brain, those mass gatherings, which we haven't really had in so long. And it triggers something in the human, in the brain or the soul or somewhere in between or both. And everybody's awake. And I think that's a wonderful thing for everybody to be present for once, because our society, the way our society is built, is very programmed.
Yeah, it's automated. You can be very far removed from reality. It's an easy thing to do.
There's a certain amount of compartmentalization that has to happen in order for you to exist in the world, right? I mean, obviously there's a lot of horrible shit happening all over the world at any given time. And if you're not just going to like melt down into a ball, you do have to filter out some of the noise around you. Especially with the internet. I mean, there's so much that we get that we did not ask for.
Yeah, that's true. And then it's sort of, if I've decided to, because I don't, the first thing I do when I wake up is not go and look at all of the terrible shit that's happening in the world, because that would just sort of burden my day, I think. So I kind of like go into that in a hopefully and appropriately cerebral way when I'm ready, so that I can stay connected and understand what's going on. But yeah, I think it is kind of like almost being plugged in that way can be, and I think that's always a weird thing, because it's a choice, Some people just have this, I think over time, we've kind of created an existentially anxious society.
Yeah, age of anxiety, yeah.
So, and it's all kind of fueled that way. And so I think people all of a sudden start to feel trapped, and they start acting irrational. And it's sort of, we need that presence and that conscious in the moment thinking to realize that you're not attached permanently to the beating heart of the technological age.
And I'd hate to open up the can of worms that is social media, but it's probably the most poisonous thing in our society right now. And that's a good amount of what Age of Machine is really about too, is being so plugged into this, sometimes, most of the time, artificial intelligence that runs algorithms to make money off of your information at an alarming rate.
Now we're getting to the point where we have to try to detangle social media from capitalism, which is like a whole another conversation entirely. But that to me is the problem, is that increasing shareholder value is the bottom line. So they're willing to basically destroy the world in the process of getting there. But, this is something that we've, I think, intrinsically known for a long time, but is really, again, come into sharp relief over the past year, is that obviously there's a lot of really bad stuff coming out of technology, but the only way that we're talking to each other is through Zoom. And I think that, for me personally, and for a lot of people, I suspect to a certain degree, the two of you as well, it's also been kind of a lifeline through all of this.
Yeah. And that's definitely looking at the positive aspects, which we so seldom do. Take a moment to appreciate the fact that here we are talking about real things with a platform in which people can listen to it and be educated about these conversations, like the fireside talk so long ago.
Yeah, and I think that, and that's just one of many things that is quite wonderful about technology, and especially throughout the course of the pandemic, and so keeping people in touch, yeah, and then that sort of thing. That's like you said, bit of a lifeline. Whenever I get a little bit upset about technology or what the implications of technology might have over time, and I always think about at least medical science. That always gets me up. That always saves me. It's sort of like it's really such a new thing. All of this technology, it's so brand new, and we're just these sort of primates just toying with it. It's really kind of funny, but it's that thing. I think
it's a bright future, and it's just about humankind reinventing themselves over and over.
Yeah, it's intent, and it's the way we use it, and it's going to be fumbling through time and space figuring it out, but that's, I guess, the human experience.
Yes, Josh and I have come to the conclusion that mankind's purpose is not necessarily to be imperfect, but it will always be.
Yeah, it's pretty good for the first 15 minutes of a conversation. So I think we've done fine work here, boys. Even if the rest of the thing goes totally off track, I think we've done the world a service. Obviously, a lot has made about your music and your personal tastes being very rooted in classic rock and the blues and older forms of music. Clearly, you're still very interested in album-oriented rock. But, since we're still on the topic of technology, do you think in the long run, or at least in even the immediate term, that current technologies will have a net negative or net positive on the music industry?
Well,
good question.
To be honest, a lot of people have asked us the question, how do you feel about streaming? Because I think a lot of musicians feel scarred in a lot of ways from music streaming, because that used to be our bread and butter, is making money from album sales.
Yeah, and I mean, coming up the way you have, that there is a threshold to actually be able to make a living off of that music, and when it comes to streaming, it's incredibly high.
Yeah, so now it's very much in the hands of the consumer, and the consumer wants everything for a low price. So that's what they've gotten, and it gives the listener an opportunity to listen to whatever they want. Just like Facebook, you get all the information, whether it be good information or bad information. So I think that the listening power of the average consumer has gone down, not too considerably, but it is a very real thing where art doesn't necessarily need context a lot of the time. For a lot of people, that's not a requirement. So I guess I can't really answer that question, but I like to think that it will, in the long run, be better for humanity, for all of us to get this art, at the touch of a little button on an iPhone.
And it's sort of like that free market thing, if you want to look at it that way, which I don't like the idea of. But you've got, the bar is so high, and people are going so far and pushing the limitations of what can be done, and there is so much of it. So it really does challenge the musician to go further, or to explore deeper, and so there's also that, which I think in the long run is a very positive thing.
Or else it just won't cut it. If it sounds like anything else, or if people aren't shocked by it, or they won't care.
I think you can go so far as to overstimulate, and then you've conditioned a culture that needs what would sound like
a 30-second pop song.
I think something that you're forgetting is that I think most people do want something familiar. People I think the vast majority of people who listen to music, at least casually, it's like a warm blanket they can wrap themselves around. They're not going out there and seeking avant-garde jazz or like krautrock or, like atonal 20th century classical music. There's a reason why pop music is popular.
It's familiar, and yeah, I guess we forget about that sometimes, don't we? We like to simplicity. I think the simplicities of music are they're the best parts, really. But you get bored at a certain point. You really try to do new things that haven't been done before.
And for me, I just want something that's honest, and that's not something that's putting on or false or trying to convince me of something that's not true. So it's like, everybody's always kind of like searching. Humans search for all kinds of things, spiritual, philosophical, whatever you want to call it. And when I think they hear something when I hear something that's not honest, I don't really turn onto it. I don't I don't really like it, and it sounds manufactured. But there's a lot of incredible in the pop genre. There's such really incredible pop music that I think is that it's honest, and it doesn't sound manufactured. It doesn't sound like some conveyor belt thing, which I think is great.
Honest is it's an interesting word in this context. I mean, obviously this is a really abstract question, but insofar as you're able to answer it, what does it mean to be honest music?
If you believe what you're writing and you're not just putting something together that you think people will respond to and it's going to be a great hit, and so it's people who really believe what they're doing in what they're doing. Yeah.
Intent, I think, is a big part of it.
Mm-hmm.
Sam, I think you had mentioned context, and I think that's the right word, because I think an upside to Spotify is that if you talk to kids listening to music through Spotify, context isn't important. Now, obviously, there's the downside of that in that, I think a lot of people who get really into music will, if you get into like Led Zeppelin, you're going to start listening to like Charlie Patton, right? Or, you're going to start listening to like some of the early British folk music. And that doesn't really exist now, which obviously in terms of historical context is unfortunate, but also there's something to be said for being like, a 15-year-old listening to music and like, listening to like post-punk 1 minute and like mumblecore rap the next, and just not having any kind of preconceived bias about the music you're listening to.
Yeah. And it also sometimes it makes it difficult to understand the music without that context. It's like you take a painting. Here's this Picasso thing. It's like, okay, I see like people laying there and a boat. And so it doesn't do anything.
My 5-year-old could have painted that whole conversation. Yeah.
But then you go into like, oh, this was painted this year. This was during the Spanish Revolution. Oh, that must be his home. Oh, and then it becomes something. One fundamental thing that every single human can understand and will understand is a story. And if we don't have time in a 15-30-second TikTok to tell a story, then what are we supplying?
I want to get back to the idea of mindfulness. I think that's really interesting. We were talking about mindfulness before in terms of just like trying to be present with somebody and have a conversation. Do you get a sense of how the past year has impacted your ability to be grateful and mindful in terms of what the four of you have been able to do as a band?
Yeah, I think being removed from the eye of the storms gives you perspective. And you do kind of have moments where you're meditating on those things, and they just sort of make more sense now than they did then. It's hard to really understand what's going on when when the next thing's already happening all the time. There's no real ideal silence for you to sort of put things together. So I think that's kind of actually what's happened in the last, couple of years. And we've gotten to obviously explore a little bit more we take the time to explore a little bit more of our artistic interests, which I think it's lended itself in a very, very positive way. But yeah, I mean, sort of like all retrospective kind of stuff. And it is sort of like you almost wonder how you didn't destroy yourself doing that. And I think maybe if it would have kept going as it did, we probably would have gotten ourselves into some trouble. But I don't know. It seems like you're always just on the brink of some kind of self-destruction.
I think that's an accurate way to describe it.
There have been moments when it felt like you were just barely holding things together.
Yeah. Just sheer exhaustion, I think, was the big part. It was just so constant. There was no break at all.
What kind of perspective have you gotten on the past several years?
It's a big question.
Wow.
I think you're right. And I've heard you discuss this before. The eye of the storm, again, is a good way of putting it. Does a fish know it's in water? I can look at your career as somebody who is an outsider, has never met you. And it seems to me like things happen really quickly and you guys got big really fast. And I suspect that just being in the middle of it, maybe you have a very different perspective on that.
Yeah, I think one thing over the past year and a half, the Tequila Train.
That's the Tequila Train, yeah.
Mm-hmm. It's 7:00.
Taught us all that we need each other. Like kind of looping it back to the first thing we were talking about is we need each other. We need to bounce ideas off of each other to create this this human synergy.
In the parameters of the Greta Van Fleet project, if that's what you want to call it, is that this band is made up of 4 components, and that is the magic of the project. So yeah, you can't just remove one element, otherwise it's just not the same thing.
And also bouncing that energy off the crowd, like we covered that bass, like that. I think that's one of the main things, and the very honest interaction between people. So yeah, I mean, it's easy just to become completely not present when you're touring 9 months out of the year.
Yeah, you have thoughts that come in and out that are sort of much more, again, present. It's sort of, you're not so hyper focused, or there's a discipline that happens when you're on a campaign or you're touring and you're doing these shows, and your mind goes to a place that makes it realistic for survival. Whereas when you're not doing that, you have these strange thoughts that would never have come to you in that environment.
One of the things I've heard from a lot of bands I've spoken to is, obviously it varies from band to band, relationships, dynamics vary quite a bit, but pretty close to a consensus from a majority of them is that to a certain degree, a band needs to be run as kind of a dictatorship, in that one person needs to sort of like have the clear vision. I never really gotten that sense from the 4 of you. It seems a little more egalitarian, but does one person have to be out there to some degree kind of leading the way?
No.
I think that we all have different departments. I think we do all lead a way, but in different ways.
Yeah.
I mean, obviously lyrically, Josh does, 99% of the lyrics. And as far as the riffy songs go, Jake is always there with the guitar. A lot of the folky, chordy songs is a lot of time Daniel. And then, I live within the keyboard realm and much more in the producing realm and the sonic quality to a lot of stuff.
And it's sort of, and then of course everybody writes, I guess. And so regardless of what they're writing on or what ideas they bring to the table, it's like we work together to sort of expand on that idea or those ideas and start bringing in new melodies and things. And I don't even worry about lyrics until that's the last thing for me, really. I focus on the vocal melody, the instrumental melody, and all those things, and then we get to conclusion eventually. But it's sort of everybody kind of, if you really believe in the idea and you really think that needs to happen, then you fight for it. And then there's a little bit of conflict, but I think conflict makes for great art, and that's part of how we operate together.
I got the sense to a certain degree that you were, as bands often do, were not necessarily workshopping, but certainly a part of the songwriting process for you in the past has been going out and playing songs live, perhaps in like not their finished album form, not being able to tour for a year and a half. I mean, how does that impact the songwriting?
Well, we don't really know what to think of that.
I guess it would be like anything we wrote before we were touring. Heat Above was written before we ever hit the road. So yeah, it goes back into, obviously we're playing live, but not to people, so you don't really have that, response. But yeah, it's just, I think
the validation.
Yeah, there you go. But so yeah, I think it just kind of reverted into a realm where you've removed that as a possible element of that equation, where you don't have the live audience, so you just play it. So
kind of like writing songs.
The best I can think.
Kind of like writing songs in the garage all those years ago. That's kind of the same thing.
Validation is an interesting way of putting it, and we've been circling around this a little bit. Validation, as far as in this respect, as far as the reaction that you get from the audience in a live setting. Beyond that, how closely do you follow? Like, do you read reviews, for example? Do you internalize stuff that people are saying about the band?
I think the place that we mostly get validation is from each other, because why would we listen to some magazine of some person we don't know who, might just be a moron? Like, why So once again, going back to the internet, it gives everybody a voice.
Yeah, we kind of just avoid reading that stuff, but it's almost impossible, to do that. Of course, people will be shocked and by things, journalists would write, and then they would, did you hear about? And then they would just tell you, and it's sort of like, oh, that's funny. But I guess it's sort of like finding a sense of, we have a bit of a sense of humor about it, and we're not the only band in history to get to be subject to criticism or
Yeah, well, it's funny because we see a lot of people who just love the music and culture so much that they devote their life to it, but we have the same kind of story on the other side with the people who despise us so much that they devote their entire life writing YouTube comments. Who's paying them?
Bit of a waste.
Who's paying them to do that?
Like, I don't think this is universal, but maybe there's something to that sort of cliche of if you're pissing people off that much, you must be doing something right. Like, at least you're eliciting a very strong response.
Yeah. Well, and we're our own harshest critics, as cliche as that sounds, but that's true. So again, it's sort of like our expectations are pretty high, and we just, you don't really, at the end of the day, give much shit about anything. What they're saying doesn't have much weight at all. It's kind of just filled with hot air. It doesn't really matter.
Yeah, we don't need the internet to help beat ourselves up emotionally. We can do that ourselves.
Yeah,
sure. So you've got each other to emotionally abuse one another.
We got all the bases covered.
Yeah, we got it.
I think another element of the conversation around technology is the question of labels. Obviously, just like on the whole, they've lost some of their power, I think, just generally as drivers of the music industry. You guys are on a label and you've been on a label for a while. In 2021, what is the value of being on a record label?
Well, I think the record label should bankroll the artist, and that's it.
Well, yeah, that's as far as is considering all of the other things that a record label would do. Sometimes you can create a bit of a mess. If you're, again, trying to force something, if you're trying to manufacture something, it's artistically speaking, that's kind of a dangerous realm to be in. If you find somebody that looks the part and has a good voice, then you get 50 writers to put together songs, and you have stylists come in and put this person together with, glue and staples and scissors and thread, and you've got let's give them an agent, and then let's give a lawyer here, a lawyer there, and
you got those songs with 15 writing credits on them.
Yeah, it's just it doesn't. I'm not sure what the longevity of that kind of curation really has. It's and then there's the question of honesty again. It's like, is this really something that person believes in, and a lot of the time you see these people really lose their minds, because they're spiritually ill, because they don't feel that they really have that voice, that they're not doing something honest or organic. So, and it's destructive. So there's that perspective, and that's just one of many things you can consider. And there's some really great things as well about.
And there are
a record label.
There are really wonderful record labels out there who understand music and anti-music. And I do believe for arts to exist, there has to be anti-art. There has to be like this evil business. This is the motive for all of this. And then we have this beautiful ethereal kind of thing.
I mean, obviously you're still on a label. There's still value for the band to continue being on a label.
Yes. And I think that comes from a place of mutual respect and the fact that the label lets us do our thing. They don't get in our way artistically, because that's our profession. We make the music. And wouldn't it be silly for somebody who never picked up an instrument in their life to be telling the musicians and the writers what to do? But it happens every day.
You want to think that the people that you're dealing with in management or the label, if not necessarily have the greatest creative impulse, are at least able to some degree navigate the industry.
Yeah. And that's, again, a really great contribution that you would see with a record label. And especially if your eyes and ears are open, you can learn a hell of a lot from those seasoned professionals that you would grow a great respect for. So And then that's another perk as well. And then of course there's loyalty and all of that. And so we take care of you, you take care of us, and that, that kind of thing.
Unheard of in the music industry.
Are there people that were there for you at the beginning that you do feel the sense of loyalty toward in the industry?
Yeah, certainly a lot of them. Yeah.
Josh, you had touched on this a little bit at the beginning, and it was something that I want to expand on when we were talking about egoism. Mm-hmm. Which is another double-edged sword. The flip side of it being you were questioning, I guess why us is maybe the easiest way to put it. Of all the bands out there, of all the rock bands, obviously there are thousands or tens of thousands of really fantastic bands that never really make it. Do you think though there's a downside to getting too hung up on that, to getting too hung up on the question of why we are the ones who made it?
Yeah, it's still quite, an unresolved question in my mind. And it's, and I'm not really sure. I have no idea why it would be us of so many. Yeah, I work ethic is a strange thing to even consider. It's like there's so many great artists and creators that don't have really any work ethic, and you never hear their name. And I guess that was one thing, is we really did look at it as something that was worth fighting for and worth putting together and getting together to create. But, and of course, the focus was it was like there's nothing that was going to stray the vision of the project. And yeah, I think, of course, just putting ourselves in the right circumstances, especially with the right people, and sort of navigating all of that, just sort of as not just artists, but as business people as well. So there's a lot to that whole mix. But
I kind of just put it in the hands of the language of the universe, and we won't know the truth until the end.
Yeah, it's not like we can't go into this thinking we're overmen. We're not sort of prophets. It's just that's not how this works. It's not how, and there's so much, and again, you're talking egos. There's so much fucking ego in entertainment and in business, just altogether, than just an industry. I think that's really toxic. So that's something that has to be removed or at least dealt with.
Yeah, I think one of the other primary downsides of thinking too much about it, or thinking about, trying to figure out the math of why a particular song was successful, is it's chasing the dragon, as they say. Mm-hmm. That kind of gets you into a bit of a feedback loop where you've had a certain success with something and you want to sort of distill the base elements of it and figure out how you could recapture that magic.
And like we were talking about earlier, that would be not authentic, because you're trying to create the same thing for the same reason.
Yeah, which is not necessarily right, what we would ever want to achieve. I think the idea is to move on, and time changes many things, and people change, as time changes, as out of necessity. And what was beautiful, but it's always like, what's the next thing? It's like all of these sort of people trying to relive something or to find comfort, like we were talking a bit earlier about comfort in things that are familiar. But it's like sort of to chart new territory and to just kind of explore more and see what can happen. I think that's really productive, and as far as the evolution of an artistic project is concerned. And we could be fat and irrelevant tomorrow, and that's it. And I'm fine with that. It's just really, as long as what we're creating is what we intend to create and what we set out to invent. And of course, there's so much to be done and said. And again, as time changes those things, there's more to be said. And when there's nothing left to say, then it's time to switch gears and do something else.
I mean, would you be fine with that though? That would obviously be a huge bummer, man. if nobody cared tomorroh.
I don't foresee that happening, but I don't really.
That probably would be a bummer.
That would suck a lot. I appreciate the sentiment, but man, that would. You've got these shows coming up, and like,
well, I would feel that there's really the reason we do this. The reason we have the inclination to create is because there are people to listen. If you were the only people on planet Earth, there would be no motive at all to create this sort of thing in the way that we are doing it and why we do it.
Once again, validation.
Just sort of just share that kind of thing.
That's the line, right? I mean, that's the line is figuring out how you can continue to innovate in a way. Like, obviously you love your fans and they are ones, a lot of them have been there since the beginning.
Yeah.
How do you push the envelope, but still, like, you still want to make your fans happy?
I think they seem to be just very interested in going wherever we're interested in going. They're the ones that are really on board for the ride. You know?
And also musically, I think our evolution is very natural and kind of mild in a lot of ways. I think that the four of us, the sound that happens, it's always there. That's always the backbone of what Greta Van Fleet is. So when we're going off trying something completely different, the soul is still there and the backbone is still within that music that we're pushing ourselves to create something different.
And there's identity in that too. I mean, we are the people that are putting this together, so there is some sort of strange consistency, but it really is sort of us trying to, I mean, there's so much music to be made, and there's so much music that has been made that it's wild how different one thing can be from the next. And so I think that's always reassuring, you know.
I listened to some interviews with the two of you where you had said that in the early days, you didn't even really think about being in a band, or a band wasn't the end goal. You were all content to just play music. At what point, though, did that change? Like, at what point did the band become the thing?
Well, let's rewind a little bit, actually, before that. I think Jake always was going to be in a band. He was always going to play electric guitar in a band. I'm not sure he ever really guessed that it was going to be with us. Josh was going to be in film no matter what. I was probably going to go into the sciences, and Daniel was going to go into, college golf.
One of you got your way.
Yeah, exactly.
This time, let's just say for now,
we could all be on the PGA.
Right, and
again, everybody wakes up tomorrow and they decide they don't like the band. You've always got golf to fall back
That's what
on.
I mean. There's much more to do. Come on.
Infinite, yeah. So,
but yeah, so that's kind of it. I don't know.
And bringing us to that point, I mean, I think the biggest influence on us was to get out and play in front of people, because we really enjoyed it, and we enjoyed pushing ourselves to be better.
There were early similar interests. Daniel had played guitar for a long time. He was a pretty great guitar player when he started coming around, and he'd played the drums, a bit, and he had a kit in his basement, and I was always singing, and I was doing theater and stuff like that. And aside from cinema, which was like eat, sleep, breathe, and then sort of, so those things all kind of had their contributed in some way. So, and then Sam sort of came out at some point. It was sort of Jake wanted you to play.
He wanted me to play bass.
Just try this thing, and showed you some chords or something like that.
That's the origin of so many bass players. Like, I've heard that story so many times. Like, you need somebody to play the bass. Just figure this out.
It's just holding it like it's a dead bird. Here, you have this. You take it. Dispose of it. But no, and that really quickly turned into keys and bass pedals and all of this other stuff, which is strange. And so, yeah, I don't know. It really just did kind of happen fairly naturally. It wasn't that we were forcing anything.
I think just following our muse, I think that is kind of where we're at. I think that's how we got here.
And that's just a good philosophy to have.
If the live show has always been the thing, do you think it's like riding a bike? You think after a year and a half, you're going to step on stage and it's just going to click?
I certainly think
of course.
You hope so, obviously.
We'll see. Yeah.
I think that there will be some polishing to do.
Yeah, I don't see how.
I think we're going to have to grease up the pedals or whatever.
Yeah, I don't see how it wouldn't be what it is. I mean, we played. Yeah, I think it'll probably be a very natural process. I mean, from the first show we've ever played to an audience, the last, lots has happened, and I don't think that we couldn't possibly do anything other than pick up where we left off.